Seneca, one of the most revered and remembered figures of Stoicism, was born at a time when the Roman Empire was in its phase of expansion and influence. He came into the world in Cordoba, in Hispania, around the year 4 BC. His life, however, would largely be lived in Rome, the center of power and civilization of his era. Amid political disputes and imperial intrigues, Seneca would become an essential figure, both for his role in politics and for his philosophical writings. What would make him unique, however, was not just his position in the Roman court, but the way he faced life's challenges, guided by Stoic philosophy. From a young age, Seneca was influenced by philosophy and the teachings of the Greek sages. His mother, Helvia, was a woman of great wisdom and virtue, which undoubtedly impacted Seneca's development. Although born into a family of high status, Seneca's life was not marked by ease. Early on, he began to suffer from health problems, which led him to seek refuge in philosophy. The frailty of his body made him turn to strengthening his mind. While his physical health limited him, his mind expanded beyond the constraints of the body. The Stoic philosophy, which he embraced fervently, teaches that true happiness and tranquility come from accepting fate and controlling one's emotions. The central belief of Stoicism is that suffering, difficulties, and life's tragedies are inevitable, but how we react to these situations defines our inner peace and character. For Seneca, the adversities he faced were part of life's natural course, and rather than trying to fight against them, he sought to accept them and draw valuable lessons from each experience. As a young man, Seneca was sent to Rome, where he studied rhetoric and philosophy. The city, then the heart of the Roman Empire, was constantly changing in terms of both power and thought. Rome was a vibrant city, with its bustling streets, forums filled with political and philosophical discussions, and a society divided between the upper echelons of aristocracy and the poverty of common citizens. Seneca was quickly drawn to this intellectual environment and began to immerse himself in the Stoic teachings that would shape his life and thought. Stoicism, which originated with Zeno of Citium around 300 BC, was a philosophy that taught that virtue was a supreme good and that living according to reason and nature was the path to happiness. Seneca was deeply influenced by these teachings and began applying these principles to his own life. For him, true freedom did not lie in wealth or power, but in controlling one's reactions and emotions in the face of life's circumstances. Even with the success of his education, Seneca's fragile health constantly accompanied him. He suffered from respiratory problems, possibly asthma or tuberculosis, and on many occasions had to withdraw from public life to care for his health. However, this forced withdrawal from social life gave him time to reflect and write. It was during this period that Seneca began to mature his philosophical thought, and his works began to take shape. Seneca quickly gained fame as one of Rome's greatest orators. His skill with words, both in speeches and in writing, placed him in a prominent position in Roman society. However, he also knew that power and prestige came with dangers, especially in the volatile political environment of Rome. Seneca was appointed quaestor, an important political position in the Roman hierarchy. Although this marked the beginning of his political career, he soon found himself involved in the complex intrigues of the court. During the reign of Emperor Caligula, Seneca was accused of being involved in conspiracies against the emperor. Caligula, known for his cruelty and paranoia, almost condemned him to death. However, Seneca's life was spared, apparently because Caligula considered him weak and believed he would not live long due to his frail health. This episode was a turning point in Seneca's life. He saw firsthand how vulnerable one's position was in the Roman court and realized that the only true security he could have was inner peace. It was at this moment that he turned even more towards Stoicism, seeking in the ideas of acceptance and emotional control a way to face adversities. Stoicism teaches that external things, wealth, status, even life itself, are beyond our control. The only thing over which we have control is our mind, our attitudes, and how we react to the events that happen to us. For Seneca, this idea was liberating. He could not control the emperor or the court's intrigues, but he could control his own mind and reactions to these situations. During this period, Seneca began writing letters and essays that would become some of the most important works in Stoic philosophy. His writings were filled with practical teachings on how to deal with adversity, pain, and death. He taught that we should not fear death, as it is a natural part of life, and that we should accept what we cannot change with serenity. In the year 41 AD, Seneca faced one of the greatest adversities of his life. He was accused of having a relationship with Julia Livilla, sister of Emperor Claudius, and condemned to exile on the island of Corsica. This exile, which lasted 8 years, was a difficult period for Seneca. Separated from his family, friends, and public life, he had to face loneliness and isolation. However, even in this moment of adversity, he found an opportunity to grow philosophically. During his exile, Seneca continued to write. He used this time to reflect on the meaning of life and death, and how philosophy can help us face trials. In his letters, he advised his friends not to fear exile or death, but to use these experiences to strengthen their souls. For him, exile was an opportunity to practice Stoic detachment. He could not control his situation, but he could control his reaction to it. This phase of his life was also marked by deep reflection on mortality. Seneca believed that death was not something to be feared but accepted as part of the natural order of the world. He saw death as a release from the pains and sufferings of the body and a return to nature. For him, exile and death were opportunities to practice true Stoic virtue, the serene acceptance of fate. Despite the difficulties he faced during exile, Seneca maintained his inner peace. He knew that even far from Rome, deprived of his status and influence, his true freedom lay in his mind. This lesson would become one of the main messages of his writings. True freedom does not come from external circumstances, but from control over our emotions and thoughts. Seneca's exile in Corsica, which lasted 8 long years, was a period that not only tested his resilience, but also consolidated his Stoic view of life. During these years of isolation, he underwent a process of intense philosophical reflection. The solitude and detachment from public life, though harsh, allowed Seneca to deepen his convictions and refine his thought. However, his life was about to take an unexpected turn. In the year 49 AD, Seneca's life took a drastic turn. Agrippina the Younger, wife of Emperor Claudius and mother of Nero, brought Seneca back from exile. Agrippina had great ambitions for her son Nero, who at the time was still a young adolescent. She saw in Seneca not only a great orator and philosopher, but also a brilliant mind who could help shape Nero's character and prepare him to become the next emperor of Rome. Returning to public life was a new challenge for Seneca. He returned to an environment of intrigue, conspiracy, and betrayal at court. Although grateful to have his freedom back, he knew that the price of this freedom would be high. Nevertheless, as a true Stoic, Seneca was prepared to face any adversity that came his way, always with the same serenity and self-control that he had cultivated during his time in exile. The young Nero was a complex figure. Although initially showing promise as a student, with a quick and curious mind, the absolute power and influence of ambitious people around him soon began to erode his character. Seneca, tasked with educating him in the principles of virtue and reason, knew his task would not be easy. Seneca tried to teach Nero the Stoic principles, emphasizing the importance of moderation, justice, and control over one's emotions. He advised him to rule wisely, to care for the well-being of his citizens, and to be a just and virtuous emperor. In the early years of his reign, Nero seemed to follow this advice. Seneca, along with the military commander Burrus, managed to maintain some influence over the young emperor, guiding his political decisions and preventing power from corrupting him immediately. Under Seneca's guidance, Nero showed signs of ruling with reasonableness in his early years as emperor. Seneca's wisdom, which preached detachment from passions and control over the ego, seemed to be shaping Nero's behavior. Seneca's influence was evident in many of the decrees issued during this period, which favored the well-being of the population and limited the abusive use of power. However, as time passed, power began to corrupt Nero. He was seduced by the flattery of the court, by excessive pleasures, and by the sense of invulnerability that absolute power brings. Seneca, increasingly concerned about his pupil's erratic behavior, tried in every way to bring Nero back to the path of virtue, but his efforts were in vain. Greed, the desire for luxury and pleasure, had taken over the young emperor. The situation began to deteriorate when Nero, encouraged by his mother Agrippina and other members of the court, began to see himself as someone destined for unlimited power, someone who did not need to follow any rules or principles. For Nero, Stoicism and Seneca's lessons on self-control began to seem unnecessary and outdated. The death of Burrus, who had been one of Seneca's main allies, was another blow to the philosopher. Without Burrus's presence to counterbalance the negative influence of other court members, Seneca found himself increasingly isolated. His influence over Nero began to wane as the young emperor distanced himself from the Stoic principles that Seneca tried to instill. One of the most difficult moments for Seneca was Nero's involvement in the death of his own mother, Agrippina. The relationship between Nero and Agrippina had deteriorated drastically, and the young emperor, fearing that his mother was trying to take control of his reign, ordered her death. This shocking event was a turning point for Seneca. Seneca, who had always valued virtue and justice, found himself in a difficult position. He did not approve of Nero's action, but at the same time, he knew that opposing the emperor could cost him his life. As a man of principle, Seneca wrestled internally between his philosophical convictions and the brutal reality of the Roman court. Stoicism taught that in situations of adversity, we must accept what we cannot change, and Seneca, though deeply shaken by Agrippina's death, decided to maintain his position at court and continue trying to influence Nero positively. This event was a landmark in Seneca's life. He began to realize that his attempts to guide Nero were failing. The young emperor was increasingly giving in to his own desires and whims, and the court environment was becoming more dangerous by the day. Despite this, Seneca tried to maintain his serenity and continue living according to Stoic principles, even in the midst of such adversity. As Nero became more tyrannical, Seneca began to slowly withdraw from public life. He realized that his influence over the emperor was almost gone, and that by staying at court, he was putting his own life at risk. The Roman court was becoming a place where betrayal, paranoia, and fear predominated. Nero, now completely immersed in his power, saw enemies everywhere and did not hesitate to eliminate them. Seneca, as a true Stoic, began practicing detachment. He knew he could not control Nero's actions or the court's intrigues, but he could control his own mind and behavior. Instead of despairing, Seneca began to prepare for the inevitable end of his political career. He gradually withdrew from public life, dedicating himself more and more to his writings and philosophical reflection. Seneca's detachment was not only a physical withdrawal from public life, but also an emotional withdrawal. He accepted that his mission to guide Nero had failed, and that the empire was on a dangerous path. However, as a true Stoic, Seneca did not allow himself to be consumed by guilt or regret. He knew he had done everything within his power, and the only thing left now was to live according to his philosophical principles, regardless of external circumstances. During these years of retreat from public life, Seneca wrote some of his most profound and impactful works. Among them are his letters to Lucilius, in which he shares practical philosophical advice on how to live a virtuous life and face adversity. These letters, written in a direct and accessible style, reflect the wisdom Seneca had accumulated throughout his life and are considered one of the greatest treasures of Stoic philosophy. In his letters, Seneca emphasizes the importance of accepting fate and maintaining serenity in the face of difficulties. He writes about death, pain, loss, and injustice, and how philosophy can help us face these challenges with courage and tranquility. For Seneca, the key to true freedom lay in learning to control our emotional reactions and accept what we cannot change. One of the central themes of his letters is the inevitability of death. Seneca believed that death was a natural part of life and should not be feared. He taught that by accepting our mortality, we can live more fully and without fear. Death, for him, was merely a passage to another form of existence, not something to be avoided or feared. Seneca also wrote about time and how we should use it wisely. He believed that time was our most valuable resource, and that wasting it on trivial worries or the pursuit of fleeting pleasures was a mistake. For him, living virtuously and with purpose was the only way to ensure we were using our time in the best possible way. The final years of Seneca's life were marked by a growing detachment from court and power. He, who had once been at the center of imperial decisions, now saw the empire following a path he knew was dangerous. Nero, increasingly immersed in his excesses, ruled Rome despotically, eliminating anyone who dared oppose him. The relationship between Seneca and Nero, which had begun with such hope for a just and balanced government, was now marked by distrust and distance. Seneca, however, continued to live according to the Stoic principles he had adopted since his youth. He knew that life at court, with all its power and prestige, was fleeting. The true value of life, for Seneca, lay in the control of the mind, serenity in the face of adversity, and the constant practice of virtue. And it was this very serenity that he maintained in the darkest moments of his life. Around the year 65 AD, a conspiracy began to form against Nero. The so-called Pisonian conspiracy, organized by Gaius Calpurnius Piso, a Roman aristocrat, aimed to assassinate Nero and replace him with a new leader. Piso believed that Nero had led Rome to the brink of collapse, and that the only way to save the empire was to eliminate the emperor. Seneca, although not directly involved in the conspiracy, was accused of being one of the participants, given his growing alienation from Nero and his previous relationship with some of the conspirators. Nero's paranoia was at its peak. He saw enemies on all sides, and the discovery of the conspiracy only fueled his fury and distrust. Even without concrete evidence of Seneca's involvement in the plot, the emperor saw an opportunity to rid himself of his former tutor, someone he now viewed as a threat to his authority. For Nero, Seneca represented a moral and intellectual figure who could, at any moment, turn against him. Seneca, on the other hand, was fully aware of his situation. He knew that in a regime like Nero's, any suspicion was enough to condemn a man, regardless of his innocence. And as a true Stoic, he accepted his fate with serenity. He knew he could not change Nero's actions, but he could control his own response to them. Nero ordered Seneca to take his own life, a form of execution that allowed the condemned to retain a certain dignity. When Nero's emissaries arrived at Seneca's house to deliver the order, he showed no surprise or fear. On the contrary, he was calm and prepared for what he knew was inevitable. The philosophy he had practiced throughout his life had prepared him for this moment. Seneca gathered his wife, Paulina, and his closest friends. In his final words, he expressed gratitude for the life he had lived and reassured his friends, telling them that death was merely a natural transition, something that everyone must accept with peace. He consoled Paulina, who was devastated by the prospect of losing her husband, telling her there was no need for sorrow, as he was merely following the course of nature. According to historical accounts, Seneca calmly cut his veins, following Roman protocol. He knew that his death was not something to be mourned, but an opportunity to demonstrate, once again, the strength of Stoic philosophy. Although the process of his death was long and painful, his veins were slow to bleed due to his age and debilitated health. He maintained his composure and continued philosophizing until his final moments. The serenity with which he faced death impressed all those who were present. For Seneca, death was not the end, but the culmination of a life lived in accordance with reason and virtue. His wife, Paulina, attempted to follow her husband's example and also cut her veins, intending to die alongside him. However, the imperial guards, acting under Nero's orders, saved Paulina, who ultimately survived the suicide attempt. After Seneca's death, she lived in mourning and silence, dedicating herself to the memory of her husband. Seneca's death was, in many respects, the final expression of his philosophy. Throughout his life, he had taught that we should not fear death, but accept it as part of the natural course of existence. Stoicism, for Seneca, was a practical philosophy, something that should be lived in all aspects of life, including how we face our end. In his final works, especially in his letters to Lucilius, Seneca wrote extensively about death and how we should prepare for it. He believed that death was inevitable and that fear of death was irrational. For him, death was merely the final challenge we all face, and like all other challenges in life, we should approach it with courage and serenity. Seneca also reflected on the importance of living in accordance with nature. For him, this meant accepting what we cannot change and focusing on living a virtuous life, regardless of external circumstances. Life was short, and Seneca believed that time should be used wisely. He advised us not to waste our lives in the pursuit of wealth, power, or pleasure, but to seek wisdom, self-control, and inner peace. For the Stoic, death was not the enemy, but a reminder of life's transience. By remembering our mortality, we can live more fully without becoming attached to things beyond our control. Seneca often reminded his friends and readers that time is our most valuable resource and that we should use it in the best way possible. He also emphasized that the true wise person lives each day as if it were their last, without fearing what is to come or regretting what is past. This idea of living in the present, without being dominated by fear of the future or the weight of the past, was central to Seneca's thought. He believed that by controlling our emotions and accepting fate, we could find true freedom and happiness. Seneca's death, though tragic in its details, became a symbol of the practical application of Stoicism. His legacy, however, is not limited to how he faced his own death. His works, which have survived through the centuries, continue to inspire millions of people around the world. Seneca's thought, focused on the pursuit of virtue and serenity in the face of life's difficulties, remains a source of practical wisdom for those seeking to live a balanced and meaningful life. In his work, On the Shortness of Life, Seneca reflects on how people waste time with trivialities, useless concerns, and empty desires. He argues that although life is short, many people make it even shorter by not valuing their time. For Seneca, time is the most precious asset we have, and we must use it wisely, seeking inner peace and virtue. Moreover, in his letters to Lucilius, he addresses how Stoicism can be applied practically in daily life. In these letters, Seneca advises his friend Lucilius on how to deal with problems such as anxiety, anger, sadness, and fear of death. For Seneca, all these emotions can be controlled through reason, and Stoicism provides the necessary tools to achieve this inner tranquility. His legacy is also present in the idea that true power and freedom come from controlling our own mind, not from controlling others or external circumstances. Seneca believed that by cultivating our mind and virtues, we could live a peaceful life, even amidst chaos and adversity. This idea of inner freedom is one of Stoicism's most powerful contributions to human thought. Centuries after his death, Seneca's thought remains relevant for people seeking to deal with the difficulties of modern life. In a world full of uncertainties, pressures, and challenges, Seneca's philosophy offers a practical way to face these adversities with serenity and self-control. His teachings about controlling emotions, using time wisely, and accepting fate resonate in a world where many people still seek happiness in external factors such as wealth, status, or power. Stoicism, in Seneca's view, is a deeply practical philosophy. It teaches us to focus on what is within our control, our attitudes, actions, and thoughts, and to let go of what we cannot control. This approach offers a powerful way to deal with anxiety, stress, and the pressures of contemporary life, and helps cultivate a more balanced and resilient mind. Today, many people turn to Seneca's works for guidance on how to live a fuller and more meaningful life. His writings offer valuable lessons on how to find inner peace, even in times of crisis, and how to cultivate a life of virtue and wisdom. In a world that often seems chaotic and unpredictable, Seneca's philosophy continues to offer a refuge of calm and reflection. Seneca's life was marked by extreme highs and lows, from his position of prominence in the Roman court to his exile and ultimately his death. However, what truly stands out in his trajectory is how he dealt with these adversities. Instead of despairing or being consumed by fear, Seneca used each challenge as an opportunity to strengthen his philosophical practice and live according to the principles he preached. His life is a powerful example of how Stoicism can be applied in practice. He shows us that, regardless of external circumstances, we can always control our attitude and responses. Even in the face of death, Seneca maintained his serenity, demonstrating that the true Stoic is one who remains steadfast, even in the most difficult situations. Seneca's example teaches us that adversity is an inevitable part of life, but our true strength lies in how we react to it. By accepting what we cannot change and focusing on controlling our mind and actions, we can find inner peace, regardless of what fate holds. For Seneca, virtue and reason were the supreme guides of life, and by living according to these principles, he found the freedom and tranquility he so greatly sought. Seneca's legacy continues to live on in his writings and the lessons he left for the world. His works continue to be read and studied by people from all corners of the globe, who seek to apply his teachings to their own lives. And just as Seneca faced the adversities of his life with dignity and courage, his readers continue to find inspiration in his philosophy to face their own challenges. Ultimately, Seneca's life serves as a reminder that true wisdom does not lie in avoiding adversity, but in learning to deal with it with grace and serenity. His life shows us that by practicing Stoicism and cultivating our virtues, we can face any challenge that life presents to us, and like Seneca, we can find peace, even in the most difficult circumstances. Thank you for taking the time to explore the life and philosophy of Seneca with us. We hope his timeless wisdom resonates with you and helps guide you through life's challenges. If you found this content valuable, please give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our future videos on Stoicism and other great thinkers. Your support means a lot to us, and we look forward to sharing more insights with you. See you in the next video.